Rome shimmered with gold and decay, its ancient streets choked with the heavy scent of burning incense and the undercurrent of rot that spoke of secrets buried deep in shadowed alleys. In the shadowed heart of the Vatican, Rodrigo Borgia, now enthroned as Pope Alexander VI, gazed out over his conquered domain with the unblinking intensity of a predator sizing up its territory. The papal tiara, a crown of tripled gold and jewels, pressed heavily upon his brow, yet he wore it not as a yoke, but as a trophy of his unyielding will. For years he had woven a web of schemes, lavishing bribes like alms to the faithless and clawing upward through the treacherous currents of ecclesiastical politics to claim the throne of St. Peter. And now, at long last, the Holy See was his to command. The Borgias were not born to nobility's silken cradle, but forged in the fires of ruthless pragmatism, their Spanish blood a foreign stain that only sharpened their edge. Rodrigo's ascent had been greased by rivers of Spanish gold, and sealed with those who dared oppose him saw their stars dim in the papal firmament, their voices silenced not by decree alone, but by the quiet vanishing of lives in the fog-shrouded dawn. The papal court, once a solemn bastion of piety where echoes of ancient chants lingered in vaulted halls, had twisted into a labyrinthine den of vice, where fortunes teetered on the turn of a card, and the fleeting favors of courtesans whose laughter masked the clink of hidden daggers. At the pulsing center of this gilded maelstrom stood Lucrezia, at just 16 summers. She was already the crowning prize in her father's grand, Machiavellian designs, a living emblem of the Borgia dynasty's unquenchable thirst for dominion. Her laughter, light as silver bells, reverberated through the Vatican's opulent halls, where sunlight filtered through stained glass to paint biblical scenes in hues of blood and sapphire. Yet behind that radiant smile lurked the keen, shadowed intellect of one thrust unwilling into a game of thrones, where every glance was a gambit and every word a potential snare. Beside her loomed Cesare, her brother, a young cardinal cloaked in crimson whose eyes held the icy gleam of a wolf stalking the herd, his ambitions a towering inferno that dwarfed even his father's colossal flame. The whispers ignited almost from the moment of Alexander's coronation, flickering like torchlight in the wind. Rome, that eternal city of marble and malice, had always feasted on scandal as its daily bread, and the Borgias served platters overflowing with the forbidden. Rodrigo's mistresses glided through the corridors with the brazen poise of queens, their bastard offspring fruits of passions unchecked, nurtured openly within the Vatican's. And Lucrezia, that sweet, seemingly innocent Lucrezia, found herself ensnared in the crossfire of rumor and insinuation, her name twisted on tongues that savored the venom. The papal court had become a grand theater, its players reciting lines etched in ambition, but the script beneath was inked in blood. Beyond the Vatican's towering battlements, the city seethed like a cauldron on the boil, its cobblestones alive with the restless tread of the dispossessed. The common folk murmured in huddled clusters of poison laced into sacramental wine, of daggers flashing in the moonless dark tales that carried the chill of truth amid the exaggeration. The Borgias enemies, the Della Rovere clan with their papal pretensions, the Sforza lords of Milan nursing grudges like open wounds, circled the family like vultures over a fresh kill, their venomous pamphlets and broadsheets scattered like carrion across the piazzas, each word a barb dipped in bile. Rome had weathered corruptions, and thus, beneath the frescoed ceilings of the Apostolic Palace, where Michelangelo's precursors had daubed visions of divine judgment, the seeds of a far darker legend took root, twisting like ivy through the cracks of history. The whispers slithered through the perpetual twilight of Rome's underbelly, coiling like serpents in the gardens of Eden's fall. What manner of family was this Borgia brood, that turned the seat of Christ into a throne of shadows? What unspeakable sins festered behind those bolted doors of oak and iron? The stage was meticulously set, the players arrayed in their finery of silk and steel, and the world, nay, eternity itself, would etch the name Borgia into its annals with a quill dipped in the blood of infamy. The first whispers were like smoke from a hidden pyre, thin, insubstantial, yet impossible to dismiss, curling into the lungs of the curious and the fearful alike. They unfurled through the smoke-hazed taverns of Rome, where tankards clinked like judgments and dice rolled fates. They slipped between the painted lips of courtiers in the Vatican's antechambers. No soul could pinpoint the origin of those damning words, but they propagated like the Black Plague through the city's veins, infecting highborn and low alike with a fever of suspicion. The Borgias' adversaries required no ironclad proof, only the spark of scandal to ignite the tinder of public outrage, something so foul, so primal, it could gnaw at the very foundations of their power. And what venom outstripped the horror of incest? Overnight, the pamphlets materialized like accusations from the grave. Crude woodcuts etched with fevered haste, depicting contorted embraces where familial bonds warped into abominations. The figures blurred just enough to evade the scaffold of libel, yet Rodrigo's heavy-jowled visage, Cesare's angular, hawkish features, Lucrezia's luxuriant waves of hair all caricatured in grotesque distortion, their humanity stripped to reveal the beasts beneath. The accompanying verses were a torment worse than any blade, doggerel laced with innuendo, perverting the Lord's Prayer into profane mockery. O Holy Father, Lucrezia, strolling the Vatican gardens amid her cluster of ladies, those gardens where fountains wept eternally and roses bloomed blood-red, would note how conversations fractured like brittle glass at her approach, eyes skittering away like startled mice, silence thick as the summer heat. Even the scullery servants, those invisible threads of the court's machinery, murmured behind. She was no wide-eyed innocent adrift in naivety's fog. She knew the barbs they hurled, felt their sting like thorns beneath her gown. Yet to confront them aloud would breathe life into phantoms, granting the lies the weight of confession. Cesare, that eternal, in the velvet hush of midnight, he cornered a trembling printer in his ink-stained lair, dagger's edge kissing the man's jugular, until names spilled forth like blood. The patron, a Sforza lackey, fattened on ducats to peddle this filth. Come morning, the printer's bloated corpse bobbed in the Tiber's murky embrace, his tongue excised as a final, mute warning. The message thundered through the shadows, clear as a papal bull, but the wound it sought to staunch had already festered beyond salve. Scandal, once unchained, defies the sheath of denial. Rodrigo, for his part, brushed it aside with the indolent flick of a ring-encrusted hand, heavy with the fisherman's seal. Let the mongrels bay at the moon, he drawled to Lucrezia over a goblet brimming with malmsey, his voice slurred by the vintage's embrace. They gnash their teeth at what they can never possess. Yet his feigned indifference was but oil on the blaze, fanning the flames of conjecture higher. Why would God's earthly vicar, shepherd of souls, not thunder from the pulpit against such blasphemy, unless the calumnies bore fangs of unwelcome truth? At a banquet orchestrated by Cardinal Orsini, that serpent of a rival whose faction coiled in the undercroft of power, a poet his verses honeyed with malice, Lucrezia's cheeks flamed like embers in ash. Yet she held her chin aloft, a statue of defiant grace. But in the sanctuary of her chambers, as moonlight bled through latticed windows, she hurled a porcelain vase against the tapestried wall, its shards scattering like shattered illusions. Cesare found her thus, amid the glittering ruin, knees bloodied on the... Yet atonement's promise rang hollow. The whispers had burrowed deep, roots entwining the heart of the city, where truth and fabrication traded places like shadows at dusk. Incest stood as the unpardonable abyss, a rupture of nature's sacred weave, the fouling of bloodlines divine, the fraying of heaven's ordained tapestry. In an epoch where the church thundered purity from marble pulpits and exalted the hearth's sanctity, no charge weighed heavier on the scales of judgment, and for the Borgia's foes, it forged the ideal cudgel. Blunt, Rome had long endured the frailties of its overlords, the gleam of bribes, the chill of midnight blades, the parade of paramours like banners of conquest. But incest? That was the chasm, a sin so abyssal it was voiced only in the hush of confessionals, yet so intoxicating it ignited like Greek fire in the tavern's gloom. The Borgias were already loathed for their Iberian veins, pulsing with avarice, for their nepotism that bloated the curia like a corpse in the sun. But these murmurs of forbidden flesh transmuted them from venal sinners to abominations, spawn of some infernal pact, and herein lay the exquisite irony, bitter as wormwood. The Borgias brimmed with guilt, yet not for this spectral crime. Rodrigo had purchased the tiara with coffers groaning under aurae, votes melting like wax before the flame of Spanish coin, cardinals' halos tarnished in an instant. Cesare orchestrated slayings with the dispassion of a falcon stooping on prey, convinced divine mandate absolved his hands. Lucrezia's nuptials were bartered like spices in a Genoese warehouse, her form the ledger's most prized entry in her father's ledger of conquests. Such transgressions Rome comprehended, even anticipated, as the warp and weft of power's loom. Yet they lacked the alchemy to unmake a dynasty, not as this phantom could, with its tendrils of revulsion. The broadsides grew ever bolder, feral in their frenzy. One, insinuated beneath a Venetian envoy's chamber door, cast Lucrezia as a latter-day Clytemnestra, limbs entwined. Another, bellowed in the ale-soaked dives of Testaccio, spun a fable of the papal keys twisting locks beyond Paradise's gate. The adversaries craved no ledger of facts, merely the germ of mistrust, nourished by the multitude's voracious palate for the grotesque. Even the church's own litanies fed the inferno, homilies decrying Sodom's fall, the perdition awaiting defilers of kin now refracted into a bleak anathema. A Florentine friar, voice quaking with feigned zeal, thundered of a lineage where the serpent coils in the bridal sheets, his finger stabbing the air without utterance of names none required. Lucrezia, ensnared at the tempest's core, emerged as both fiend and sacrifice. To the prurient, a siren ensnaring her blood. To the pitying, a lamb corrupted by the shepherd's sworn. Verity paled beside the narrative's allure, and oh, how that tale tantalized, a forbidden fruit ripened in scandal's orchard. Cesare, the chessmaster cloaked in scarlet, discerned the peril's sharpened edge. They daub us as fiends, Rodrigo, sprawled in his privy solar amid damask cushions, goblet tilting like a scepter, merely rumbled a laugh from his ample chest. Let the chaff prattle, mere zephyrs on the gale. But Cesare, schooled in the siegecraft of courts, knew better. Utterances, fragile as parchment, had felled colossi before. The Borgia's tangible trespasses their graft, their garrotings, their vaulting hubris paled beside the fable crystallizing in the ether, a saga that would eclipse their deeds in posterity's glare. For in the grand chronicle, it is not actions that endure, but the echoes others ascribe to them, and Rome's scribes already dipped their pens in gall to pen the Borgia requiem. Lucrezia Borgia was never consigned the role of mere filial shadow. She was the keystone, a filigreed golden key forged to unbar the vaults of supremacy her father, Alexander VI, yearned to plunder. From her earliest steps on the cool travertine floors of Spanish palaces, she had been sculpted for one inexorable end. But was she a fervent architect in her sire's blueprint, or a pawn maneuvered across the blood-stained board of Renaissance realpolitik? The enigma, veiling so much of her existence, lingered in the Vatican's perpetual gloaming, where candle flames danced like accusing spirits. Rodrigo Borgia had ever been a soul untrammeled by sentiment's silken fetters. His devotion to Lucrezia burned true, a rare ember in his forge of calculation, yet it smouldered always through the prism of stratagem. She was his paramount treasure, a gem to be proffered for fealties forged, duchies devoured, hegemonies harvested. By her 13th year, betrothals had already encircled her thrice, her troth pledged to lords whose fealty could be minted, or whose realms swallowed into the Borgia maw. The inaugural union, to Giovanni Sforza of Pesaro, unfolded as a transaction glacial as a winter Danube. The Sforza, Milanese titans, lent northern bulwarks to Alexander's crusade, their alliance a chain link, yet as tempests of policy veered alliances fracturing like hoarfrost, so Lucrezia's destiny pivoted on her father's whim. The bond dissolved in ambiguities thick as Tiber fog. Giovanni, harried from Rome's maw in terror's grip, while murmurs swirled that the rupture pivoted on aspersions of his barren seed, or, more sinister, that Alexander had conjured the farce wholesale to liberate his jewel for barter more lucrative. You shall ascend as queen, her father had purred in the annulment's wake, his fingertips grazing her cheek with a tenderness laced in artifice, eyes gleaming like a merchant appraising silk. Lucrezia inclined her head, voice steady as a vesper bell. As you decree, Holy Father, but veiled by docility, what tempests raged in her breast. Posterity's quills would diverge, some etching her as ornament pliant, will subsumed to paternal decree, others proclaiming her a virtuoso of the veil, her honeyed demeanour masking a psyche keen as any assassin's edge. The verity, perchance, danced in the liminal haze betwixt her secondary espousal to Alfonso of Aragon, Naples' princeling, scion of a realm glittering like a crown upon the Tyrrhenian wave, wove another filament in Alexander's tapestry of triumph. Naples, that Mediterranean diadem, would crown the south as Rome bowed to Borgia's sway. Yet this knot, too, unravelled in crimson threads. Alfonso would never taste his scepter's weight. His frame, sundered by blades in a fetid Roman byway, lay cooling under stars indifferent, perpetrators nameless yet shadowed by suspicion's finger. It was these nuptials, these jarring, visceral upheavals in her path, that nourished the abyss's gloomiest echoes. Why flaunt a daughter through troths and torsions so public, so pitiless, unless their affinity harbored shadows unnameable? The libellers leered from their hides. What suitor could slake a bride proclaimed by kin's foul grasp? Lucrezia's attendants chronicled nocturnal sobs, raw as winter gales, yet by cockcrow she emerged composed, visage a bastion serene as she knelt at her father's flank in the Sistine Rite. Was it stoic surrender, tacit alliance, or the adamantine grit of one schooled that endurance in the Borgia Colosseum demanded mastery beyond all rivals? Alexander, fancy I would squander such radiance on mortal swain, be he kin or crown. The riposte was calibrated audacity, deriding the aspersion while seeding ambiguity's fertile soil. In fine, Lucrezia's worth to her progenitor brooked no query. She was the consummate contrivance, ravishing, the Borgias trafficked not in affection's fragile bloom, but in power's adamantine forge, and as Rome awakened to that truth, power unveiled itself deadlier than any carnal flame. Cesare Borgia traversed Rome's labyrinthine veins like a stiletto loosed from velvet, fleet, soundless, lethal in its precision. Where his father orchestrated with aureate cunning and labyrinthine guile, Cesare favoured the bite of tempered steel, his path a crimson wake. His notoriety was hewn from slaughter's stone, unyielding and eternal. The cardinal who had spurned his scarlet stole for breastplate of Milanese forge, the pontiff's heir, who marshalled legions with the same fervour he once intoned the canon, yet it was his entanglement with Lucrezia that truly unloosed the hounds of calumny. The siblings were as Siamese shadows, inseparable in feast and fray. Cesare, perpetual sentinel, shadowed her steps with a vigilance that brooked no trespass, his aura a ward against slight or sabotage. He ushered her to the basilica's rite, tarried at her revel's edge, and quelled pretenders with a glare promising the noose or the knife. To the court's myopic gaze, their proximity reeked of the unnatural. To the Borgia creed, it was the marrow of survival. Lucrezia, in turn, seemed to flourish in his umbra, drawing where outsiders beheld peril, she discerned fealty unyielding. "None fathoms him as I," she once murmured to a confidant amid the rustle of brocaded sleeves, her timbre laced with fierce pride. "He is no chimera of their fevered dreams." But Rome, that crucible of cynicism, professed deeper wisdom, or so it deluded itself. The slanders had germinated in her girlhood's spring, tendrils alleging Cesare's sojourns in her bower overstayed fraternal bounds, his salutes upon her cheek lingering like brands, his largesse rubies like congealed blood, sammites woven with threads of Tyre, a poignard hilted in nacre suited more to paramour than kin. The essence, as ever, swam in ambiguity's murk. Cesare was possessive, aye, a dragon hoarding its trove, but whether his ardour veered from brotherhood's harbour into forbidden straits, none could attest with certainty's blade. When her inaugural bond to Giovanni Sforza crumbled like ash, Cesare bore the decree of rupture, and whispers clung that he had menaced the groom's throat with steel should he balk the quill. When her sophomore consort, Alfonso of Aragon, surfaced gashed in an alley's filth, Cesare's silhouette emerged from the gloom like nemesis incarnate. He would slaughter for her, the sycophants hissed in alcoves. But for her possession, or her favour? The query corroded Lucrezia's lustre like acid on vellum. Had Cesare excised Alfonso from political exigency, or from the green-eyed serpent's coil? The chronology condemned. Alfonso, youthful Adonis beloved in Lucrezia's rare dawn of tenderness, a matrimony kissed by genuine spark amid the Borgia blizzard severed in sanguine abeyance. Cesare avowed naught, disavowed less. Beset by a sot of nobility at carousal, he merely vortexed his Falernian, lips curling. He who cannot clasp his own merits, no clasp at all. The inquirer fell mute as the tomb that night. Lucrezia's lament rang public, crystalline in its anguish. Yet scarce a fortnight hence, she resumed her vigil at paternal flank. Weeds traded for Tyrian dye, countenance a citadel impervious. Some chronicled absolution's grace, others breathed she had orchestrated the dirge. The fraternal tether only knotted tighter in the slaughter's wake. Cesare, Grand Vizier of vendettas, ordained her tertiary troth to a consort of his forging. Alfonso d'Este, Ferrara's Duke, a union to anchor Borgia tendrils in the Po's verdant north. And had they conspired in felony's bower? Had loyalty's cord frayed into the unspeakable? The crux, swathed in power's pall and propaganda's pallor, eluded the grave's grasp. But one verity endured. In Cesare Borgia's eclipse, Lucrezia was warded and warded alike a sovereign on a chequer where every advance dripped crimson. And crimson, as the Borgias divined above all, defied the launderer's art. The banquet hall gleamed as a cage of auric splendor, tapers guttering waxen tears onto salvers chased with apostolic arms, their flares etching elongated spectres across walls where gods and martyrs gazed in silent reproof. Pope Alexander VI presided at the board's van, his guffaws a thunderclap as he elevated a chalice faceted with emeralds to rouged lips. Encircling him, Rome's potentates gorged, prelacy in carmine brocade, barons whose signets sparked like distant forges, all unwitting extras in a masked terminal. This was the Borgia board, and not every guest would sup of dawn's light. Lucrezia, swathed in emerald velours that mirrored the garden's envy, held court with the finesse of one born to the sceptre, fingertips grazing her vinous stem, lips arcing in a simulacrum of mirth that chilled her marrow. Adjacent, Cesare reclined as a leopard in torpor, optic keen as a falconer's, raking the throng. The ether hung gravid with capon's savour and vinous spice, undercut by a piquancy acrid, lurking beneath civet's veil. The inaugural casualty was Cardinal Orsini, scion of that perennial thorn. His countenance, ruddy from bacchanal excess, blanched to cerement. He clawed his vitals, inhalations rasping like bellows rent. Illness grips me, he wheezed, utterance drowned in the revel's roar. Ere his frame spasmed to successively, the banquet's bloom wilted, a fledgling baron wretched into his charger. A mitred sage gouged his gorge, orbs protuberant as a hanged man's. The toxin, insidious artisan, stalked the draughts, the loaves, the candied citruses cantarella, some breathed, the Borgia's alchemical sigil, a venom so exquisite it evaporated sans spore, bequeathing only husks. Lucrezia beheld the carnage unfold, her demeanour a lake unstirred. As Cesare inclined, exhalation a zephyr against her lobe, she quailed not. They merited no quarter, he susurrated. She saved by Aurora's pallid blush, half a dozen lay extinguished. The rubric would murmur of tainted bivalves, mischance's cruel jest. But Rome's underbelly divined deeper. The calumnies erupted as pyres in dry brush. The Borgias had winnowed adversaries beneath festivity's guise, banqueting as supplicants gurgled terminal pleas. Nor was this the inaugural such rite, nor the ultimate. These envenomed symposia ascended to saga, buttressing the clan's chimeric dread. What breed consigned guests to the reaper under welcome's banner? What lineage's heiress presided placid as blades reaped at her trencher? The rejoinder was inexorable. The Borgia, as the fallen were born to unblessed earth, Alexander hoisted his beaker anew, grin avuncular as a serpent's. To vitality he saluted, and the remnant, quaking in their doublets, imbibed with throats constricted. The nuptials had unfolded as a pageant of samite and sovereign metal, a Borgia proclamation engineered to bedazzle the eternal city into obeisance. Lucrezia, scarce 13, had fronted the altar in lace of Murano's loom, diminutive palms entwined with Giovanni Sforza's, Pesaro's seigneur groom nigh double her winters, his smirk the complacence of one deeming fortune his thrall. He yet divined not that his espousals were ledger entry, fated to rupture as swiftly as a parchment decree, amid susurrations darker than the Tiber's midnight shroud. The succeeding carouse outlavished Borgia excess, vintages cascaded as cataracts, boards sagged beneath Pavonine roasts, plumage reaffixed in macabre pomp. Lucrezia, mask of rehearsed equanimity, quaffed salutes from lechers who appraised her as chattel. Athwart the nave, her custom ordained the bride's convoy to the nuptial crypt, there to seal the sacrament beneath a tester's vigil, irrefutable warrant of its veracity. But as the multitude lunged, Alexander uplifted palm. Sufficeth, his timbre clove the din like a crozier's stroke. My child abides in youth's bower, permit them seclusion's grace. Hush plummeted as an excommunication. It flouted right, denying Rome the spectacle of consummation's proof. Giovanni's scowl deepened to eclipse, yet protest died aborn. Lucrezia's dames escorted her to seclusion, tread deliberate, gaze demure as a novitiate's. In Camera's veil, the veracity or its absence would burgeon to febrile conjecture's hothouse. Giovanni would attest the rite's fruition. Lucrezia, in abrogation's tribunal, avow its barrenness. Yet the nullity itself was Borgia sorcery incarnate. Alexander, necessitating Sforza severance as Milanese gales gyred, proclaimed the league void on sterility's pretext, a mortification for Giovanni. Compelled to subscribe his own emasculation, nos cavaliers yield such confession sans duresse. They menaced me, Giovanni snarled to confederates post-flight from Rome's jaws. The pontiff's spawn pressed poniard to my gullet. The slanders took wing as harpies. Had Giovanni's loins faltered as the Borgias proclaimed, or had intervention profane forestalled the rite? Echoes writhe through the vias. Had Lucrezia's patriarch or frater interposed? Had she been preserved pristine for ends eclipsing the conjugal? The Vatican's edict rang adamant. The league invalid, Lucrezia liberated for Christ's great. Was it contrition's balm, opprobrium's sting, or tactical ebb, permitting scandal's ember to gutter ere her reprise in paternal pageant? Giovanni, divested of consort and consequence, railed Borgiaward for annums, ire the bellows to rumour's forge. Fiends they are, he inscribed to appear. What patriarch voids his daughter's troth on such soil, unless her utility lies elsewhere profane? The interrogative suspended, a sword of Damocles. For Lucrezia, that inaugural bridal vigil heralded not Genesis, but overture, a harbinger of perfidies and ploys that would limn her epoch. And for Rome, corroboration that in the Borgia the convent of San Sisto stood as an isle remote from the Vatican's auric frenzy. Its cyclopean stone ramparts stifled Rome's babble. Incense's balm and vellums must supplanting court's voluptuous haze. Hither Lucrezia Borgia quested sanctuary, or its facsimile. Her ingress was precipitate, unheralded, swaddled in homespun serge, tresses aureate veiled as a penitence. She infiltrated the abbess, visage stern as Byzantine icon. Eyes flint-sparked, accorded wary veneration. This, after all, was the pontiff's scion, a Magdalene or Maria? The superior ventured no wager. The calumnies stalked her hither, unquenched. Within the cloister's sanctity, sorores conversed in sibilance of the uproar that hurled Lucrezia to their aegis. Some commiserated, child, spouse discarded by consort, forsaken by lineage. Others scrutinized with wariness. Why barter pomp for penury unless encumbered by bale too grievous for secular gaze? The canard burrowed as by it proliferated the galleries, borne on novices pilfered peeks at her silhouette. Was it Sforza's begetting, sown in that contested dalliance, or issue of umbrage, Genesis too abhorrent for nomenclature? The circulating libels had already branded her Circe, her sequestration but fanned the pyre. The abbess enjoined muteness. Lucrezia partook of the rite with crown, yet the sisterhood marked her palms quiver, inhalations falter at Campanile's knell. Cesare materialized once, mantled in cowl, apparition unbidden. The abbess nigh swooned as he bestrode the garth, spurs abrading flagstones. He and Lucrezia conferred in undertones proximate the apothecary beds, countenances vaults sealed. On departure, his mien broiled as thunderhead. Dawn summoned a leech, circumspect, Vatican unyoked. He probed her in bar-locked, but Rome's fabulists demanded no autopsy. The chronicle vivified autonomous. Lucrezia, the venomous lily, exiled to cloak her infamy. Some averred covert parturition, infant exiled to pastoral hush. Others potions to scourge the cradle, transgressions laundered in sanguine tide. Alexander VI, would ye bar her portal? Yet confederates traded sidelong darts. Synchrony too pat, susurrations too strident. Lucrezia lingered at San Sisto moons uncounted. Thus she re-emerged to radiance, crest elevated, confidences entombed abyssal. Let Rome's lingua rasp, she would eclipse them, a phoenix from ashen libel. The vias of Rome gleamed slick with heavens weeping the eve Alfonso of Aragon perished. Lucrezia had dissolved in saline when tidings arrived. Her secondary lord, comely and clement Alfonso, the sole mortal she had hazarded heart to reposed, mangled in alley mire. The Aragonese pact had curdled. Naples availed Alexander's vault no more, and Cesare Borgia, that garden adder, had veiled disdain for his kin-in-law in neither word nor deed. Lucrezia, swathed in sable, genuflected by Alfonso's bier in Oratory's penumbra. His lineaments retained death's beauty, savagery's outrage clashing the repose mantling his traits. She imprinted chill brow, lacrimae pearling his inert breast. "Who wrought this shadow?" she breathed. The warders fidgeted. None replied, but Rome's tribunal convened sans gavel. Grief's courier dawned. Cesare souls a braiding knave's chill. He loomed o'er Alfonso's shell, fizz a palimpsest. Lucrezia deigned no uplift. "Your sorrow peals too shrill," he intoned at length, timbre subterranean. "The Aragonese will wet your—" Alfonso embodied multitudes. Neapolitan bloom, pawn in paternal chess, yet never peril to her essence. He had borne lyre's canticle, sonnets bloom ephemeral idyls of lenity in a realm mandating male. "You misread the cosmos's mercy to the fair who adore unbound," he chilled. "I forestalled thy tardy revelation." The utterance wrenched as gutting knife. Sans the oratory, the slanders burgeoned. The Borgias had immolated their own, not premier nor terminal. But this slaying diverged, no prelate outworn, broadsides disseminated hourly, tinct fresh, limning Cesare as fratricide biblical, Lucrezia lamenting Abel's shade. Adversaries pounced, tones syrupped in feigned pathos. What freighter fells his sister's paramour? Premier in her span, the paragon filial knew treason's bite, and Rome vowed amnesia none. Alfonso's immolation pivoted the Borgia epos, attestation that none not lineage eluded their rapine. The incest intimations, erst dismissed as venom vain, mishaps befall, he quipped. The diplomat forewent the cup. Lucrezia, interim, spectralized in her own fast, and she receded, abandoning him to Taper's judgment, artificer of self-doom. Alfonso's vitae had riveted Borgia destiny. Henceforward, the cosmos beheld the Vatican's loggias susurrated with rustling gloss and a tar's allure. Vesper's knell long faded. Pope Alexander VI, Julia Farnese, La Bella for tresses, aureate tumbling as cascade, ensnared his optic at tender 16. Ascending he convened symposia where Lehman dined flank to episcopate, baubles scintillant in Lumen's kiss. He lavished dignities and demesnes on byblos, enthroning them o'er ecclesiastical peers. His progeny Lucrezia, Venozza's wheel, primed for scion splices. His heir, Cesare, erst cardinal, discarded Sultan for adversaries hungered no ampler arsenal. If Alexander flouted celibacy's oath thus flagrantly, what further canons would he trample? The intimations slithered from osteria to synod. He who hoards concubines may hoard his own. The incest aspersion, erst hyperbolic, Alexander affected indifference. He doted his get, sanctioned or spurious, with hubris verging iconoclasm. At Lucrezia's hexadecimal, he bestowed her palazzo autonomous, murals nymphal and citon struck. When Caesar craved papal phalanx, Alexander annulled his purple with Julia, perdurance's sibyl, wooed Lucrezia with trove and sibilance, ligating the maid with confidences cloying. Venozza, demoted yet undimmed, wielded Rome's submundane, her demimonde abuzz with arcana. They gauged their leverage o'er Alexander, and apostasy's tariff, but Lucrezia tendered the supremest levy. Each paternal paramour's parade, each osculation of Julia's digits civic or digits dally on Scullion's flank, burnished the slanders encircling her. If the vicar shunned shame, what palisades endured? The apotheosis outrage. Alexander, paternal effusion's paroxysm, convened ballet for byblow, nascent this by damsel so verdant guests averted optic. That nocturnal, as libations laved and terpsichore's whirled, Iberian pontiff accosted throne. Holiness, is this decorum? Alexander, flanked to Julia's cincture, cachinated till jowls quaked. Decorum? We are all progeny divine, no? The prelate retroceded. Phys. Cerus. Fortnight bore the fable, Europa-wide, embroidered per narration, by Parisian ingress, the ballet orgiastic, the newborn imp, Lucrezia perennial Lucrezia willing acolyte in paternal profanities. Alexander's odalisques comprised no felony. The felony his effrontery, piety's pretense rent asunder. In realm where sway hinged on mirage, he had stripped the arras, rendering every familial phantasm plausible. For why halt a law defier at kin taboo? As Julia Farnese quipped to tryst partner, susurrus mellifluous malevolent, When Pontiff enacts Diabolus, whither the mummery concludes. The query shadowed Lucrezia's ambulation, and Rome, scandals gourmand, divined its terminus. The estival of 1,503 smothered in torpor, ether gravid with Tiber's feta and herbs perspiration on tenterhook, Rome stewed in own canker, epicenter Alexander VI, erst unassailable, now haunting as pursued. His dewlaps drooped, palms quaked, cachinnation erst basilica shaking dulled to wheeze. On August 18th's Vesper, Alexander supped with Cardinal Adriano Castellesi at suburban villa. The repast Borgia lavish, Phaeson torrid, Syconia honey, dewed, vintages cellared pontifical, but as gloaming deepened, commensals noted anomaly. The pontiff, gluttony's thrall for viand and verbiage, nibbled desultory, phys cadaverous. Holiness, malaise, Castellesi probed. Alexander flapped dismissive, bagatelle, the calenture belike. By midnight's chime, he convulsed in torment. Varlets lugged him Vaticanward, vestments sodden, respirations shredded. Leeches convened, verdicts cupped, tertian ague some, repletion others, but Rome, suspicion's forge, proffered toxin, the calumnies kindled as heath fire. Had Della Rovere triumphed where phalanxes faltered? Had Sforza, seething o'er Lucrezia's abrogation, insinuated gall in papal draught, or, gelid, deity exacted nemesis on cannon trampler? Cesare, repatriating from Romagna Fore, unearthed paternal closet pandemonium, the Titan erst lay atrophied, neath Sericum, dermis motley, optics delirious. Bedward, Lucretia clutched chrism vile, lips framing mutism. Who authored this? Cesare exacted, tamba falchion. Leeches traded visors, physis, perchance. Or, the stigmata evoke Cantarella. The vocable dangled malediction. Cantarella, Borgia arm, toxin traceless. The paradox acrid as aloes. Had Alexander succumbed to self-stratagem? Cesare's fizz gloomed, to sibling, who companion terminal? Lucrezia's grasp faltered. Castellesi, but assuredly Castellesi. Cesare expectorated nom de plume toxicon. Della Rovere cat's paw. Yet dubiety glinted his iris. Venom feminine, some averred. Spurned leman vengeant, cornuted spouse or proximate perfidy. Alexander's terminus grotesque tableau. He ranted daemonia, igna's lambent pedal. At whiles he clamoured Lucrezia, timbre fissured trepid. Filia, venia. Alternately vituperated umbrae soul he beheld. Tertiary diem, as soul crimsoned Occident, papal pneuma stilled. Hush-cloaked Vatican, then sub-ramparts, sonata swelled, murmur to thunder. Rome's demos, Borgia, yoked, surged piazzas, vociferation grief relief disbelief's alloy, the pontiff deceased, terror's regency finis. Or so deluded. Apostolic demane, Cesario a pater's shell, phys hieroglyph, Lucrezia, Gene channeled, extended palm. He eluded. Naught alters, he lulled. Borgia we remain. Sans, lupines gyred. Della Rovere, Sforza, Orsini opportunities sent. Seed vacant, Borgia puissance filament. As inaugural cobble clanged portal, interrogative scorched fiercer than Leo's blaze. Parricide or irate omnipotens? Rome concorded never, but inevitability loomed. Borgia aeon terminus. Sanguine, sealed. Sans Alexander's adamantine papal clasp, Rome assailed Borgias as famished lupine pack. Cesare, erst ecclesial invincible, adrift as flotsam, paternal decease sundered puissance veins, Pius III, neophyte, endured fortnights ere Della Rovere enthroned Julius II, ancestral foe, Borgia aureat finis. Cesare expatriated nocturnal covert, hauberk bartered mercantile drab, swagger abated fugitive scurry, yet nom de plume gravid excess. Snared Naples by Gonzalo de Cordoba, erst confederate, he dungeoned. Fata no more self-wrought, tidings lanced Ferrara, whither Lucrezia refounded as Este Duchess. Epistle quivered her grasp, perusing Frater's fetters. Hispania, then Lamolus's bleak donjon. Hymen non perdurat, informant scrawled. Rex no amity traitors. Lucrezia laved no saline. Excess lacrimae Borgiaward squandered. Instead, epistle furled, gown plaited, phys ducal bastion. Yet Bauer's solitariness, brow to sills gelid, she susurrated nom de plume unintoned anims. Cesare, his curtains swift. 1507, quatern after paternal, Cesare Borgia perished, Navarre clash, felled not strategos but ignotus pike, Italia's terror ignominious, corpus corvid fodder, Ferrara ingress, Lucrezia mandated obsequy, cathedral genuflect, veil sable occulting fizz, lips litany tacit, minions susurated, freighters fierce amori mourned, or monsters holocaust, perchance twain, for Lucrezia, Cesare's eclipse ultimate severance pastward, absented, terminal viva vinculum Borgia cloven, no more pontiff's filia, no warlord's sorrow, liberated if such feasible to solipsism. Lucrezia este, perjurer of legenda, cicatrices endured, nyctalops, she envisioned Rome, aureate halls, toxin symposia, freighters tenacious clasp, pater's calculus grin, awakening asphyxial, digits sheet-clutched, focables revenant, yet dawnward, composure's cuirass, paramount dictum imbibed, perdurance non-evasion umbra, entombment abyssal, audition impervious even self, thus perdured she non-Borgia, but alter ego plenary, perdura their scourge, Ferrara 1519, ducal fastness ascended marble lumen citadel, its parterres redolent citrus efflorescence, naiad murmur. Hither, toxin cabals Rome remote, Lucrezia Borgia, Lucrezia d'Este, perambulated solar beams, phoenix incarnate, tertiary troth salvation's font, Alfonso d'Este, Ferrara's duke, no versifier smitten as Aragonese doom, no cipher as Sforza, sovereign autonomous, pragmatic, unruffled by bride's suzerain train, prime encounter, scrutiny appraising, non-lascivious. Gossip's chaff irks me naught, he avowed stark. Fealty alone imports. Thus Lucrezia pledged fealty, immersion role fervent astonant self, no more Vatican bauble passive, she pulsed Ferrara's vita, versamonger patroness, artes aegis, matrix burgeoning este progeny, demos, circumspect Borgia infamous, soon hymned her clemency, pauper, alms, famine, cathedral genuflections unfeigned, yet redemption's path thorned, umbra past clung tenacious, masquerades convened, masks veiling murmurs, venefica rivals, freighters leman, libels smuggled mercantile, tincture tainting renaissance with arch sins, even dames, ostensible loyal, recoiled tactile, vespertine, parterre promenade, infans minor coddled, Alfonso accreted, souls gravel crunching, discourse persists, he unvarnished, timbre bass, Lucrezia dissembled not, perpetual, perturbs, infans innocency surveyed, world's asperities naive, whilom galled, numquam amplius, she exhaled, petal rose, descending, let lingua lash, ego nosco. Alfonso perused, phys rune, conjunx mea, heredis genitrix, satis, but Lucrezia sagacita, Borgia nomine non sluffed facile, Cesare's wraith haunted perennial, deceases bolt thunderous, brutal for brutal, secret obsequy, taper private oratory, lacrimae occult, frati amor trains et perfidus, fatum sculptor upate, absent, terminal vivat esti puelle condam. Ye Ferrara, rumor infiltrated, itinerant freighter piazza invade mulia coccinea, peccata irreluctantia, throngs optic palaceward. Alfonso expatriated orator, noxium facta, Lucrezia's prelium maximum non potentia, sed memoria, past non-rescribable, sed futurum formatrix. She commissioned iconi pie ducisse, matris devote, dotes claustra, nomine lapidary foundations, insured historia memoret ultra Borgium, yet pater's decease anniversary, solar solitariness, crater vinus, annos moliorant traits, non oculorum onus, calicem elevavit tacitum, susurrus subordibilis, domui Borgia, maledicto mecumperit, extra, Ferrara campanilia sonurunt, pulchri lucidi. Mundus processit, sed Lucrezia semper interrogavit, maledicto evasit, an sola custodia terminal, Borgia mythos perdurat, non veritate, sed inevitabilitate, saecula defluxerunt ex Lucretia, spiritus ultimo ferrara. Ex cessare cruor navarre solum madens, ex Alexander VI cadaver sepultum, postea profanatum hostibus, tamen susurrationes perdurant. Incestus humoris, venenum, peccate nominata adierint nomini umbra irremovibilis, quantum vis is scrutinio historico, cur, responsum in natura potentiae, fabulae equis sensus faciendae, Borgiae noxia multa, ambitio, parricidium, nepotismus, proditio, sed heic renaissance politica vulgaria, moneta omnis domus regnantis Florentiae Venetiae, quod Borgia singularis fecit, audacia eorum, peccata iactabant aetate, hypocrisin imperante, Alexander VI concubinas palam tenuit, biblos juxta principes sedens, Vaticanum theatrum superbiae. Caesare cardinalatus vestem pro armatura abiecit, ambitio nuda utensis. Et Lucretia, formosa, a enigmatica Lucretia, lusit ludum gratia damnabili complicitate. Crimina realia monstra sufficiens, sed realitas saip minus satiat quam mythos. Incestus rumor perdura vicia calumnia perfecta. Improbabilis, memorabilis, corrosiva prorsus. In mundo ecclesia moralitatem praedicante corruptione practicante, papa filiam lecto socians indictio hypocrisis ultima, Borgias machinationes complexas ad primal redigit, rationem praetoriantum imaginationi collectivae hames barbed incidentum, et fortassi gradu quodum, cregi voluerunt, Borgias tenebras fantasias potentiae inlicitae repraesentabant. Monstra erant post renaissance aurum facient latentis, testimonium quod, etiam electi dei daemonia larvati esse possent. Legenda eorum monitum et tril perversum serviebat, peccatoris pingere mundanum. Abominationis pingere memorabile. Lucretia presatim facta carbassa, omnis timoris fascinationisque aetatis. Victima and vilis, Agnus and Lusor, veritas, ut semper, mytho turbulenta, mulier navigans mundum nuias bonas electiones offerens, agentia eius viris fatum regentibus circumscripta, sed historia feminas prefert sanctas vel meretrices, et Lucretia complexitas incommoda categorisationi. Borgia mythos deigis minus quam de nobis dicit. Fames nostram revelat fabularum suspicionibus profundissimis confirmantium. Potentia absolut corrumpit, pulchritudo depravitatem celat, institutiones fidem aventes aece putridae ducentium. Borgias has veritates, non finxerunt, solum incarnaverunt, flare infamia secura, et sic mendacia veritatem superstunt. Pamphlets Renaissance Romae facti libri historiae hodieni, cinctura eorum evanuit, sed venenum imperitum. Aduc locimur Lucretia crimina asserta, Caesare appetitus monstrosus, Alexander libidines impi. Id facimus qui alternatio humanos acceptare, flaud, ruthless modice minus satiat quodamodo. In fine, Borgia verum legatum non crimina perpetratum, sed fabulas nolimus mortuas sinere. Et fortasse id fuit peccatum maximum omnium.